Good afternoon, everybody. It's 3:30 and I want to be prompt with everyone's time. Thank you so much for joining us as we sort of rethink and reimagine how we do speaker events and how we think together and learn together in this time of upheaval is probably the best word. So just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. This session is being recorded, and within a week we will have it posted to the DRF YouTube page and website, so you will be able to reference it. Also, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. As the presentation is going on, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in. And at the end, we will field as many of those as possible. We did have several questions that came through during the registration. So we will take care of those, but if others come up during the course of this call, please feel free to share those. So with that said, I'm going to introduce Ted Abernathy. Many of us in this area know Ted. He has done much work for our community in thinking about economic development and workforce, and he does that in a lot of other communities around the United States. And we're so grateful for his friendship and his knowledge, and he's going to be leading our conversation today, and we think you will enjoy it greatly. So Ted, take it away.
Much. It's nice to be with you today. The topic is an interesting one today. It's economic development in a post-pandemic world. And we make our living trying to be trend trackers or futurists. And I can tell you, it's pretty hard to imagine a post-pandemic world when we're still fighting this crisis that we're in. We spend our days trying to balance the global pandemic with the global recession, with the upheaval that we have politically, both internationally and domestically, and with the social awakening that's causing issues around our country. So it's a really interesting time to try to imagine what happens next. And we're going to try to do that for you today. Nobody's got a perfect crystal ball, so I don't want anybody to pretend like we have all the answers. I know Anita, Stephen, and I know that we're reading the tea leaves we see as best we can. So we're going to spend about 35 minutes talking to you, and then we're going to do some Q&A among the group, and then try to answer questions from you. And we're going to start with Stephen Moret, and I don't think I need to do an introduction. Stephen's probably one of the most well-known people in the state of Virginia, but he's the president and CEO of the Virginia Economic Development Partnership. Started his career at McKinsey. I ran across him first when he was the president of the Baton Rouge Chamber of Commerce in Louisiana. I think they came and visited us when I was at the Research Triangle Regional Partnership, and I still have a fleur-de-lis that he signed on my wall. I had to dig it back out when he got all famous in Virginia, and I brought that out. And has been, was the Secretary of Commerce in Louisiana under Governor Jindal. He's an LSU Tiger, and I'll go ahead and say that because there's a theme, because somehow or another we ended up with two LSU Tigers, because Anita's also LSU. It must say something about the instilling of a need for public service from LSU. But an MBA from Harvard, a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, and over the last year, probably the most interviewed economic developer in the country, I think. I don't know if you feel that way, Stephen, but it seems like it's true. On a serious note, I have always thought of Stephen as one of the thought leaders in our field in economic development. I've been in it a long time, and people come along every now and then that think a little bit differently and are successful by trying to figure that out. And so we asked him to come today and share some thoughts about Virginia as it comes out of the post-pandemic, what that's going to mean for places like Danville, and just give us, what's his crystal ball looking like. And I'll introduce Anita after he's finished. So Stephen, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Ted, and great to be with all of you today. I've admired your work, Ted, for many years, and Anita, we appreciate so much you being part of our latest issue of Virginia Economic Review, talking about the future of America post-COVID-19. Of course, that's our topic for today. But great to be with you all, and look forward to your comments and questions as well. I'm going to start by chatting a little bit about the impact that the pandemic has had so far on Virginia and how that compares to the country as a whole. I'll talk about the outlook for recovery. I'll talk about what the post-pandemic economic development environment could look like in Virginia. And finally, I'm going to talk about opportunities to position Virginia and the Danville region for healthier shared growth. And I think you're going to see some overlap between my comments and those that Anita will make based on her recent writing in Virginia Economic Review. So first of all, the impact of the pandemic, obviously you all have experienced this, but it kind of evolved over time. Initially and most severely, we saw the big impact of those occupations and industry sectors that were most directly impacted by the social distancing requirements that were necessary to address public health challenges. That includes hospitality, retail, and of course, healthcare. And not surprisingly, as that went on for a little while, we started to see secondary effects from the multiplier effects of those companies that provide products and services to those sectors. So we did start to see a broader impact. But the interesting thing that has developed over time is that the economic impacts of the pandemic have really kind of bifurcated, and you in a sense have two economies. You've got these, on the industry side, you've got these large, well-capitalized traded sector firms that for the most part have faced relatively modest effects, in some cases even benefited from the pandemic. On the other side, you've got many small businesses and their employees who largely have been crushed. Likewise, you've got the college labor market, the professionals and so forth that largely have a bachelor's degree or higher, experiencing certainly some job losses, but in general, pretty small losses, low unemployment. Stock values are still rising. At the same time, you've got this other population of lower wage, largely service workers, more women, more people of color who are facing higher unemployment and higher, more significant economic challenges. So it's really been a stark divide that's played out across the country. Christopher Mims, a reporter with the Wall Street Journal, wrote a really important piece recently. I would commend to you. It probably came out in the last week or so, that really highlighted that stark divide. And one of the things he said in the piece was, quote, "There are now two Americas, professionals who are largely back to work with stock portfolios approaching new highs, and everyone else." And I thought that was a nice way to sort of put it succinctly, this sort of challenging situation. The other thing that's really happened in the pandemic is that it's accelerated the digital transformation plans of companies, with many of them achieving their 5-year goals in just a few weeks. I mean, think about how many people, more people today are relying on video conferencing technologies like the one that we're using now. How many more people are using all the various digital tools and e-commerce applications that are available? It's really been transformational. As we kind of look at these national effects and think about how does that compare to what's happened in Virginia, this is one place that we are fortunate, because there are a couple of big reasons why, while the same trends have played out in Virginia, they've played out in a softer way. If you look at the job losses here as a percentage of where we were pre-pandemic, considerably better than the US overall. Unemployment effects considerably better, state budget effects considerably better as well. There's two big reasons for that. One is that we have an unusually large percentage of our economy that's driven directly or indirectly by the federal government, roughly a third. Both the direct federal employment in Virginia, but also all the contractors that are served, that serve the federal government. And second, and perhaps less well known, is that we have an unusually large percentage of our total employment that's made up of professional occupations that can be more easily performed remotely. So those two things have benefited us overall, but again, it has not made us immune from those stark divides that I talked about earlier. At some point in Virginia, not too long ago, more than 1 million people cumulatively had filed initial unemployment claims, although fortunately, many of those have gone, in fact, back to work, so the actual unemployment rate is much smaller than you might think otherwise. So let me shift toward looking at the recovery outlook. We've been tracking some surveys of economists that the Wall Street Journal has been doing. And there's now pretty much a consensus, not 100%, but let's say 2/3 or more of economists in the US now see a recovery being underway, but looking toward kind of a long sort of Nike swoosh kind of shaped recovery. The various forecasts from groups like IHS Markit and Moody's Analytics kind of vary, but generally for Virginia, they suggest that we would have recovered roughly half of our lost employment by the first quarter of 2021, a few months from now, but that it could take anywhere from 2 years to potentially 4 years to fully recover employment and get back to where we were before. Now, the thing that we have to remember, though, and one of the things that BDP has been putting a lot more attention on, and that certainly I would encourage you all to think about in the Danville region as well, is it's not just a question of getting people back to work. Many people will not only be unable to go back to their previous job, many of them will be unable to go back to their previous occupation. So there's going to be tens of thousands of people that will not only need to find a new job, but a new occupation as well. That's going to create really an unprecedented need for reskilling and retooling and so forth. Very important place for our higher education institutions to contribute. Now, we of course, I think a lot about economic recovery and how to accelerate that, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But first, let me set the stage for what the post-pandemic economic development environment could look like in Virginia. One of the things that, as we put this latest issue together of Virginia Economic Review that we were thrilled that Anita participated in, one of the things that I became aware of was that when we really look at the various industry sectors whose prospects are kind of being lifted or strengthened by the pandemic, Virginia is actually quite strong in many of those. In fact, we're a leader in many of the technologies and industry sectors that are benefiting in some way from this, and that likely will see their growth accelerated permanently. Think about cloud computing. We're a dominant player there. Microsoft, for example, just announced 1,500 jobs in Northern Virginia. They have their largest data center complex in the world, not far from Danville, as you all know. We're the global leader in data centers, a business that was already growing rapidly that's gotten even stronger as a result of the pandemic. We're doing about $10 billion a year of investment in that sector. We're a leader in autonomous systems. There's a recent expansion of Torque Robotics, for example, and not far from Virginia Tech. E-commerce, of course, a huge driver in supporting the pandemic era. Amazon, the day that we announced Amazon HQ2, almost 2 years ago, Amazon had 10,000 employees in Virginia. Today they have 18,500 on their way to more than 40,000 over the coming years. It's just a huge positive story for Virginia. Food and beverage processing. This is one of the places that Virginia is a big player. We're definitely seeing additional growth in that sector as well as a result of folks shifting from more of a restaurant orientation to more prepared foods at home and so forth. Commercial trucks with Volvo, delivery vehicles, of course with Morgan Olson, one of the fastest growing companies in Virginia right now that took over the former IKEA plant, is headed to more than 700 jobs, potentially 1,000 or more. And then of course a variety of logistics opportunities. All of these things are things that we were already doing well in and really are going to help us to get out of this pandemic and to potentially be able to get back to being one of the growth states in Virginia. The other thing we should remember is that thanks to the efforts of Governor Northam in particular and the General Assembly, we are making historic, unprecedented investments in rural broadband access across the Commonwealth. For the first time, we're on a track to get near ubiquitous coverage in about 7 years, which is really, really exciting. So as we look toward the future, let me talk a little bit about that. We see 4 big types of growth opportunities. One, reshoring of manufacturing and supply chains. There's definitely going to be some level of a shift of many companies that want to be a little bit closer to their customers for basically to deal with pandemic risk and other risks of supply chain disruptions. This doesn't mean all the opportunities will come to the US. I mean, we got to think about Mexico and Canada as well, but that is going to be a growing opportunity and one that the Danville region will be particularly well positioned to participate in. Second, what we loosely call Digital Virginia. Even before the pandemic, we envisioned the tech sector broadly defined as by far our largest traded sector economic development growth opportunity. Think about data centers, cloud computing, cybersecurity, unmanned systems. There's just a whole range of things. And while the Danville region is not yet one of the bigger employment regions in Virginia for that space, it will be growing over time. Another big opportunity is telework. Obviously, we've got most people that are working today in America are working from home, but there is an expectation that even after the pandemic is over, we will see some permanent increase in telework. Now, most of that will probably be hybrid, so where people maybe work more from home, but they do still go into the office fairly frequently. But a certain percentage of that, we think a material percentage, would be people working remotely permanently. Anita, I know, is going to talk about that a little bit. I agree completely with her perspective, so I won't repeat that. And then finally, I mentioned this retooling opportunity, an opportunity not just to help people get back to work, but to potentially help them to get better jobs than they had before. And that's where we think about things like the governor's G3 initiative, like Fast Forward, like the Virginia Talent Accelerator program. So 4 big opportunities that we see. So what do we need to do to be able to capture those opportunities? I'm just going to rattle off a few things that I think will be important for the Commonwealth to do, and a few things that I think you all can focus on in the Danville region and with the Danville Regional Foundation. First, at the state level, broadband It was critical before, it's more critical than ever now, not just for education, but for healthcare, for economic development and beyond. I believe that one of our goals as a state, additionally, should be to be America's best state for talent. We're already the best educated state in the South. We have the best public schools in the South, one of the best higher education systems in the country. We should commit as a state that we will be not only the most educated state in America, but that we'll be the best at every aspect of that, from custom workforce solutions to community colleges to Fast Forward and the Virginia Talent Accelerator Program and beyond. Site development will be critical, and the state investing more to prepare sites for those manufacturing and supply chain opportunities. Building on our international trade development programs, which are already the best in the country, another big opportunity to grow sales, to create more jobs, and also marketing. We don't like marketing in Virginia. We kind of think of ourselves as so great that we don't need to tell that story sometimes. But I have to tell you, there's a big gap in the perception of Virginia in, say, North Carolina, for example, where both of us have a great business climate, both of us have a great education story. But if you look at the surveys of corporate executives nationally, while they view Virginia well, they view North Carolina about 10 slots ahead of us. So North Carolina typically is in the top 5 states in the country. Based on perceptions of corporate executives, we're typically in the 10 to 15 range. We have been getting better. We did best North Carolina in a number of surveys, but not the ones that are based on corporate executives. That's the place where we have to close the gap. Finally, I just want to touch base briefly on a few things I think the region can do. First of all, I just can't emphasize enough how impressed I am with what this region has done to reposition itself for growth over the last 10 to 20 years. I mean, it's absolutely remarkable. And many of the wins that have happened in recent years are really largely an outcome of that work, from the great community college programs, the manufacturing talent development related initiatives that you all have done, ILR, the work of the Danville Regional Foundation and beyond. I really want to just reinforce the importance of continuing those great investments to build that manufacturing pipeline, that manufacturing talent pipeline, because there'll be more opportunities there. I think second, building also on the same traditions, but building also some tech sector related opportunities. I just finished a great book called Reprogramming the American Dream by Virginia native Kevin Scott, who's the CTO of Microsoft. And one of the things he talks about is opportunities to leverage AI, artificial intelligence, to encourage rural growth. And finally, the last two things, continuing efforts to expand the supply of housing, especially in the context of mixed use, attractive, walkable development. And finally, following the advice that Anita Brown-Graham is going to share from her terrific piece in the latest issue of Virginia Economic Review. Thank you.
Stephen, thanks a lot. I think we're all looking forward to Anita telling us all that stuff you hinted at for a few minutes ago. And you talk pretty fast for an LSU guy, so I just, that's a lot of words. So thank you. I don't think you said a thing I disagree with either. And I wrote down, took lots of notes, so it's good. Second speaker today is Anita Brown-Graham, a friend of mine. She and I first ran across each other in the early 90s. I think she was a professor at UNC at the time, doing work on revitalizing communities, and I was trying to take notes to see if I could keep a job at that point. So Anita's now a professor of public law and government at UNC Chapel Hill. For many years, she ran the Emerging Issues Institute, North Carolina's premier think tank on what to do in the future. And she is an LSU Tiger, but did get to UNC for her law degree. So congratulations on that. Football season must be important to the two of y'all. I've never had a team that really was important for me. Anita and I have spent a lot of time together over the years talking about issues and trying to see them from perspectives that are from different sides, and have had some wonderful discussions about that. Probably I'll have one today or two. But Anita, I too enjoyed your piece, and you come at this a little bit different. Go ahead and give you the kudo that all the questions we got prior probably are the ones you're going to get after this, because it's right in your wheelhouse. So if you'll share a few thoughts with us, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sure, happy to do that. Thank you so much, Ted, for having me. And Stephen, thanks for the opportunity to pen a couple of words. It was easier for me to say those words in a Virginia-based economic development publication than it might have been for me to say them here in North Carolina. So just to give you all some context, I can't talk about Danville or Virginia with nearly the depth that Stephen just did. And so I'm really delighted that he went first. But Danville actually is a place that I have visited many times. In fact, the first week that Carl Stauber was on the job at the foundation, he invited me up and took me on a tour and talked about where Danville was. And maybe each year thereafter, I had reason to come back to Danville and to see the amazing investments and the return on those investments over time. So while my spiel may feel less optimistic than you may want it to, I want to start with the conclusion and say what I'm suggesting Danville is already doing. Everybody looks for silver linings in all crises, and there are certainly opportunities that are created. But I was struck by how many elected officials from rural communities across North Carolina were saying to me in March and April and early May that they had been reading in the popular press about this great reshuffling that was going to happen. And all the people who lived in New York were going to pack up their bags, leave their condos, and move to less dense places. And I tried to go back in time and look at other crises. Clearly nothing in recent history like COVID, but just something that would indicate that we would see that kind of mass disruption in where people live, and I could not find evidence for that. Now, that's not to say that even before COVID-19, there were not some people who were choosing to live in less dense places than they had been before. But the number of places that were benefiting from that migration pattern were really small, and they were not the places that were calling me and being overly joyous. So in this piece that I did for Stephen, I basically offered a little bit of advice to places that had been trying to build their economy from the inside out. And my advice was keep doing that. So continue to focus on growing your talent from within. As Stephen has said, there will be some high-skilled individuals who will now have the availability and the advantages of remote working, and that might motivate them to move to less compact communities. But it isn't going to be enough to transform the trajectory, the economic development trajectory of any place, and certainly not a place of Danville's size. So recognizing that you may be able to get some people who don't have these hybrid jobs where they actually have to go into work, and therefore, even if they're working remotely, can't afford to be too far away. What you really need to be focused on is building your talent pipeline, retaining your talent pipeline, and then making space for newcomers as they come. But the space for newcomers cannot be the primary objective. And I've been watching some even states with this focus on recruitment of talent, assuming that there are incentives that can cause people who want certain cultural amenities to walk away from those in order to live in other places. And I would just say again, there is no evidence historically or currently that suggests that that will happen. When you look at the data that some of the popular media studies are citing, there are things like the number of people who are hitting websites for homes in more rural places. I don't doubt for a minute that that data is solid, but the data actually hasn't translated, for example, into sales. So the fact that someone sits at their computer and dreams, I have some dreams myself of a house on a lake, that's not enough, I think, for us to presume that the trajectory is going anywhere other than, as I've said, where it has gone historically. So then if you're going to retain your local talent, the question is, how do you do that? And obviously it means that you keep assembling the kind of authentic amenities that showcase what makes Danville a special place. Workers will continue to crave communities that offer them experiences that feel grounded in the realities of that space. And so creating, cultivating, supporting your local entrepreneurs who are boosting your creative connections and placemaking will continue to be very important going forward. And then Stephen made some references to technology and how that will really begin to reshape a lot of not just our sectors, but our realities. And this is one of those places where I think big cities have had a competitive advantage, but it isn't clear to me that they need to continue to have that advantage. So everybody is going to need to adapt very quickly. We already see lots of examples where COVID-19 is sparking smart city upgrades. We have more data capabilities in government today, in state and local government today, than ever before, and much of it has been pushed in the last 6 months. So you will see governments in particular turning to digital infrastructure, and the private sector, as Stephen said, will expand the use of automation for all sorts of work duties and for transportation. In the past, it has been true that the larger places have had more capacity and more agility around this. It isn't clear to me that that has to continue to be the case, particularly in a place like Virginia, where, as Stephen said, there is an effort to level the playing field, to equalize the competition by state investments in the sort of core infrastructure that are going to be necessary for the innovation that we know will come around the post-pandemic era to take place. So that, I think, is really important. The last thing I would say about this is really about real estate. So I've been saying to my friends, these local officials, don't go out and start building a bunch of new office buildings because you think companies are gonna all come down, usually we'd say down the 95, to North Carolina. But there's certain things that I've been watching communities do, even in the pandemic, that seem really smart to me. One of them is continuing to invest in co-working spaces. So one might think, why would you have a co-working space? Why are you erecting this in the middle of a pandemic? Who's gonna come sit in it? But of the 7 non-big city co-working projects I have been watching, all 7 of them are going forward. And my guess is that all 7 of them are actually going to be more successful post-COVID than they might have been before, because for that small percentage of people who do end up wanting to move and who are able to work remotely, we already know from our surveys before COVID that isolation is often one of the reasons why people move out of that way of working. And so if communities are able to now begin to build in some capacities to capture whatever percentage of people who have always lived there or people who have moved there are now able to take more advantage of remote learning, the better those communities are going to be. So that again is one option for building important infrastructure that reflects this kind of reimagining of what communities might be and what sort of amenities they might offer, without assuming that there's going to be this grand reshuffle experiment. Ted, I'll turn it back over to you.
I finally got the unmute right. I figured I'd be the first one not to do it. One of the things that our firm does is act as the economic policy advisors to the Council of State Chambers, which is all the state chambers of commerce around the country. And we've been doing work for them on sort of what do we see out the back end, what changes after COVID. And I thought I'd share a few of those. Some of them have already been touched on, but I'll start with just the nature of remote everything. Yes, we've all been remote working, but we've also been remote grocery shopping and remote banking and remote exercising and, remote entertaining ourselves and everything. And, we've developed new patterns, and the people who have changed the most are not the millennials who were already doing all of that, but people my age who for the first time ever decided, I can remote bank. I don't need to go in there. And I don't have to go to the gym. I can get a Peloton and do that at home. And then I can ride my bike with my high school friends through New Zealand in the morning, and you don't need to do that. And I think that remote is here to stay. And what that really means is the things that we displaced with remote are going to be impacted. So gyms are going to be impacted. Movie theaters are going to be impacted. Grocery store size is probably going to be impacted. We're going to see some downstream things about this 6 months of training we've all got by necessity to act differently. And that's what it takes is getting comfortable with it. We didn't have any choice. We were thrown right in the middle of it. And now we can do things remotely that we never did before. I think that both speakers, both Anita and Stephen, talked about the need for training. I think workforces are going to change because businesses, you ask a business right now what their workforce needs would be in 2021, they'd all throw their hands up. Some of them are going up, some of them are going down, some are going sideways. So you're going to see more flexible workforces, more gig, more part-time, more on demand. And so, IBM spent 40 years having 20% of their workforce as part-time. They worked full-time, but that way they could fluctuate. I think you're going to see more companies doing that. I think that nationally, we're going to reposition more. You're going to see states and communities come out of this thinking that, well, I've never done food processing, but there's opportunity there. Let me see what we can do. In our work, we're seeing places that didn't think they were tech all of a sudden realizing they've been doing cybersecurity and didn't realize healthcare technology companies have been growing without noticing it. And they're starting to pay attention to those professionals that are a little different. I think you're going to see a huge influx of robots in America, not just in manufacturing and construction, but in service industries, in retail, in healthcare, because robots don't get sick and they don't have to stay home when there's a stay-at-home order. And so we're going to have a new commitment to robotics in our country. I think the rising, we call it the rising geo-muddle of our international relationships is going to change the way our exports are done and the way our foreign direct investment. And Virginia has been a leader, as Stephen said, in foreign direct investment. It's not as easy as it once was, and that's a little different. I think that productivity is going to go down in the short run. And while I'm not sure if I agree with Stephen on the Nike swoosh, we kind of like the square root sign. We get most of these jobs back in the next 12 months, but then it takes a long time. I think the Congressional Budget Office is projecting 10 years before we get back. In the last recession, it took 6.5. I think that last million or two is going to be a long time coming. And I think reduced productivity, because people are distracted, is going to cause us to have GDP that's lower than we expected. And that's probably going to cause the term recession to stay a little bit longer. I think long term, a year ago, we were talking about how federal debt had gotten to the point that it might impact future investments. And now we had a year where I think we're $3 trillion down on what we've taken in as a government and what we spent, added to the deficit. So long-term expectations on infrastructure commitments from the federal government, or even labor commitments, I think as my grandfather would have said, sometime you got to pay the bill. Sometime it comes due, and I worry about that. I also worry about four other echo things. Governments and higher education are going to get hit hard in year 2, 3, 4 as we have cuts. And so I think, Anita, your institution put out a thing the other day that said they had lost $100 million so far. There are a lot of universities in the country that can't afford to lose those kind of dollars. And state, especially local governments, are going to have their tax revenues hit hard in the next few years. Maybe not as hard as we thought initially, but it's still going to be tight times. Healthcare has been partially subsidized by federal money, but rural healthcare was in trouble before we started. The demands have been high. That doesn't go away just because we're on the other side of this. Third one is small business churn. We got a lot of small businesses that have been hanging on by their fingernails, waiting to get reopened. And when they come back and all these other things, all the remoteness and all the other things we learn, they come back and only 75% of their customers come back. Then in the next few years, we're going to see some real carnage in small business. But at the same time, we sent everybody home, and everybody's learned that, you know, I can do this pretty independently. I should start my own business. And I think you see a lot of people start businesses at the same time. So I wouldn't be surprised for, you know, record small business failures and record small business starts in 21. I think that is there. And then the last trend, that the one that scares me the most is mental health issues. When you look around the country, the data is really raw. So we don't know for sure as many things yet, but it looks like we have record alcohol sales. This will be record cannabis sales, record suicides, record domestic violence. I think suicide rates were up. I think I read 13% in the last 30 days. And a study was just done that 31% of people in America were depressed or thought they were depressed. This isolation combined with the stress and the other things is putting a big pressure on us as a society. Some of us don't feel as isolated because we seem to be on Zoom calls 12 times a day. But even that doesn't feel like the contact that I like and am used to. And so I think that as we come out of this, we'll have economic healing, but we'll also have a lot of social healing that we'll have to do. We'll have family healing, but community healing. And so I applaud the Regional Foundation for continuing this type of effort to continue communicating, because I think that as we get isolated as a community, we start breaking down the fabric of what we've gained. And Danville's gained a ton over the years. I agree completely with Stephen. The work that's been done by the foundation and others to sort of build the social fabric of the community is its strength. And as we come out of the pandemic, recommitment to to that weaving of society together is really important. And then finally, I think that the trend that none of us mentioned, and yet probably all of us have dealt with today, is this sort of national reflection that we're going through on equity and inclusion, and whether or not society is fair and right, and what's going on. My call immediately before this was talking to a client in another part of the country whose building had been firebombed. Because they were a business organization, and the graffiti on the outside is pretty tough. You know, I'm not suggesting that the complaints are wrong, but we're hardening our positions, and it's getting tough. So I think that those kind of issues are what we're facing as we go forward. And as we keep thinking about it, I think companies are going to be really focused on return on investment. And while redundancy is the name short term, we'll get back to efficiency. It won't be here forever because there's competition. So all of those kind of throw into the group, and I'd ask Anita and Stephen to take your mutes off for a minute and then just reflect on what you've heard from everybody, from each other, and let any comments anybody wants to throw in before I start tossing a few questions out to you.
Ted, I think I would pick up on your really important point about the fragility of the social fabric. It's very easy to sort of think about what are the economic impacts and what's the trajectory going forward, but really sitting with the extent of mental health issues and substance use issues and violence, interpersonal violence, that's the harder stuff to think about how you get around. And it's not just, we'll flip on the switch one day and everybody will go back to life as we once knew it, and this stuff will all go away. And so as we really ponder what it means to reimagine our communities in the wake of this pandemic, I think as much time and energy and thought needs to be put into those issues and how we strengthen the social fabric going forward.
Yeah, thank you, Anita. And as I mentioned earlier, I agree with everything in Anita's piece as well as her comments today. And Ted, also, almost everything you said resonated with me. I am a little more optimistic about the how long it will take us to get back to full strength. I guess time will tell. And I do think it depends to an awful great extent on various actions by the federal government, by state governments and so forth. But boy, 10 years for me would be, that would be a real disappointment. And obviously think about, there's quite a bit of research on the lifelong career impact of college graduates coming into a labor market without a good start. It tends to stick with them for a long time. So I really, really hope we can all get focused on a rapid recovery. I think you kind of touched on this. I think one thing that hasn't gotten enough coverage is the importance of states and localities in their fiscal situation. I believe it's one of the biggest things holding up the next round of federal support, but I think it's a super important issue because if the states and localities are not able to, they obviously have to adopt balanced budgets. If they don't get some additional flexibility and support from the federal government, it's going to cause a longer recovery time period, a deeper recession, because there will be more cuts. Higher education, which is really badly needed and facing one of the biggest challenges it's had in decades right now, would be hurt even more than it already is. So that's certainly something that I'm hoping for. You touched on small business churn. I really am quite concerned about so many of our small businesses that are most directly impacted by social distancing. And by the way, whether or not those rules were there, the numbers would still be way down, just out of fear, that so many people have. It's just tremendously challenging. So many of them, with so little cash to begin with, and now facing months and months of zero to very low sales. That's a place I'm really concerned. I think over time we're going to see the vitality of the small business sector rise again, but I think we're going to see a lot more pain, before we see the other end of that, sadly. And I was glad. I think both of you touched on the mental health issue. I think we're still kind of wrapping our heads around that, but I think it's a really big challenge that so many of us are facing, and it's almost hard to put your finger on exactly. Depending on the situation, there's different types of mental health challenges that people face, but it's a really important issue. And I think one of the things that we need to do, and that I've tried to do with our staff, is to just kind of, encourage folks to seek help, if they're really struggling. There's no shame in doing that. In fact, it's a really healthy thing, I think, to seek out assistance when people are having trouble, so it doesn't turn into something worse. But thank you so much for your collective thoughts.
To touch a little bit on Anita's comments on the massive relocation probably not happening, and I happen to agree with her. I think we looked at a lot of data that going into COVID, people had been moving out of New York and Chicago and Los Angeles already. And in fact, larger cities had had a net negative of domestic growth in recent years. Now, part of that had been offset by international growth because those gateway cities attract international investment. And obviously, not a lot of international people are on the move right now, and that's part of that. But the main places that people were moving, were Austin and Nashville and Charlotte and even Seattle, which some people say people are moving out. And last year it grew, and I think this idea that people might choose something different, I'm not discounting it, because I talk to a lot of people who are having, I don't know if it's a crisis, but it's a reflection on what's important and how they live their lives. That said, they're not going to move to a place that doesn't have broadband, that isn't near-ish an airport, that doesn't have the housing choices that Stephen enumerated, and doesn't meet the same things that were always important for relocations, which is a safe environment with good health care and good schools.
Jobs, yeah.
Now, if you have all that stuff and you're nearby, then okay, then you've got a chance. But that's a big if for a lot of places. I need to jump in. You're on mute though. See, now I got 1-to-1. We're tied now. You got to unmute.
I think the host has to unmute. Yeah.
Oh, I don't think so. I didn't unmute you.
No. The host had muted me. So I think you're right, Ted. But I think what people are looking for is, in addition to the physical infrastructure, the broadband, the airport, the housing stock, there's also a certain amount of cultural capital. It's not coincidental that people leave and move to Nashville or Austin, places that are college towns or high amenity towns, because they offer that opportunity for sort of peer cultural experiences that will continue to be really important.
I agree with you completely. I think that the subset of where people might go is not the universe. It's a subset. And you could see that movement, but I don't think this is the beginning of the mass repopulation of rural America, which there's been. Yeah.
I would add, Ted, to Anita's point. I think she makes a great point about focusing first on retaining the folks you already have. The really cool thing about this remote work shift is it really, there's the opportunity to keep those you have. There's also the opportunity that some folks actually might want to come back.
Yeah.
That were there before, right? That didn't necessarily have the professional job opportunity previously. This is just anecdotal at this point, but we've heard quite a few stories of native Virginians who are working in Silicon Valley for one of the top 5 tech companies, and when the company said, "Hey, you can work permanently remotely," they moved back to Virginia. And I suspect most of those that are coming back are maybe going back to a place they were before.
That makes sense. So a couple of the questions that we got before by people who were registering resonate with me with a project that we've been doing for the Kettering Foundation on economic opportunity around the country. And we did things from Montana to Virginia, all over the place with communities, and talked about what creates economic opportunity. And the title of the report at the end of this was, "A Rising Tide Doesn't Actually Raise All Boats." And 81% of the people in the community forums we had said that people need help to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, that's really just an old saying that doesn't have much relevance in today's world. What we heard over and over was that economic development that doesn't help the people that are already living there, you shouldn't be doing that. It's not, you don't need to be doing economic development to bring people in from another successful place to your place. And so we got a couple questions going into this about, are there strategies that we can do in economic development that do a better job of helping the people that are already in Danville, for instance, rather than just creating jobs for people to move to Danville or anywhere else? What's the strategies for local? Anybody want to jump on that?
I would offer a couple thoughts. I think I do think that the one thing that we really need to think about in economic development is, moving beyond just sort of the transaction of getting a company to expand or to move to a new place, and really thinking about the whole learning ecosystem. Because what you're really getting at about that notion of someone going from one place to another is this notion of being able to have perhaps some assistance to navigate, what are the opportunities that either are available to them now or might be available with additional education? Where might they be able to get that education? How might they finance that education, including potentially dealing with childcare implications and so forth while they're trying to go through that? We have a wonderful education system in the United States and in Virginia, especially in North Carolina and Virginia. But I don't think we do a particularly good job of helping people navigate the learning system, particularly post-secondary. And we don't do a good job really helping reach people where they are, right? We certainly have institutions like community colleges that are so good at connecting with folks, but when you really think about the totality of the economics of what it costs to attend, and also just taking someone that may not have the social network and helping give them the information to understand the opportunities available to them, I think those other pieces are really important. The Strata Education Network has put out something I think is pretty compelling called a new learning ecosystem, and it hasn't yet been fully implemented anywhere, but it's a very compelling vision that they've laid out that talks about these different pieces to help people advance. The other thing I would add, and Anita may have other thoughts to share here, but the more that I've gone on in my career, and I don't mean this as a political statement, although it might sound like one, but the more I've kind of come to appreciate that, we've got to have some kind of people that work hard in a full-time way as an adult, I think should be able to support themselves and their families. And that is as much, I think, potentially a public policy question as it is, an education or workforce development question. I do think we've kind of got to get at both of those things. We probably don't have time today to get into some of the ideas I've heard there, but I do think that, let me just say this one thing. If you look at the workforce in America, the entire labor market, we talk a lot about getting folks to go to college because, on average, there's better job opportunities. But the reality is there's a growing sort of number of people that are taking on a lot of debt to get, say, a bachelor's degree or more, and they're actually not getting a college level job. In fact, roughly 30% or so of those that have a bachelor's degree or above are not in a college level occupation and are not getting the college earnings premium associated that we typically associate with that. So we actually have a problem that there's not just an education or attainment gap. There really is, there's not enough good jobs actually also. And I think that's partially a policy question as much as it is kind of a labor market and education question.
So just two very quick supplements to what Stephen has said. And Stephen, I should tell you that I worked with the North Carolina Department of Commerce this winter to help them draft their 4-year economic development plan. And we were gonna be all about first in the nation in talent. So don't steal that from us. One of the things we did was travel all around the state and the regions, doing these focus groups, talking to stakeholders. And I was surprised. This is maybe the 3rd, 4th economic development plan I've worked on in my career. Nobody talked about incentives. Nobody talked about incentives. People were very focused on this issue that you've raised, which is we seem to have the pieces for talent development, but there's something missing here. We need to help people navigate through these systems in ways that make sense and in ways that are informed by what the opportunities are on the other end. But the other thing that I heard, which goes to your point about jobs, was a real focus on quality over quantity for the first time ever. The need for the state to create opportunities, whether that was through tax credits or otherwise, that incentivize businesses to support employees in a broader way than has become the case in recent years. And we were hearing this from economic developers and from companies themselves saying, we understand that the margin of excellence is somewhere beyond what we are offering right now for our employees. We ought to all be focused on how to deliver that.
Yeah, and you know, one of the challenges, you touched on incentives, one of the big challenges in economic development is that the reason incentives still play such a prominent role, I mean, part of it is certainly some companies expect them, but another part is that if you have an actual transaction, if I were to go to the General Assembly and say, you know, we've got a great project opportunity that will create, you know, 500 jobs and we need this $1 million for incentives, we can get it 100% of the time. When we're talking about creating a better, you know, learning ecosystem and creating these talent pipelines that have more of, let's say, a medium term to longer term payoff that can't be explicitly connected to individual companies or projects, it's just much harder to get the support. You know, Amazon was a really interesting thing. One of the lessons I learned in Louisiana that largely informed the way we went after HQ2 is that, you know, knowing that you could get support for that transaction, what if you actually put in some of those programmatic things into the package, right? We knew, for example, we need a much bigger tech talent pipeline, not just for Amazon, but for our whole state. And so we actually got this enormous historic investment in the tech talent investment program that's benefiting every region of Virginia by making it part of our bid to Amazon. That said, you know, the ideal model would be just to do the right things, you know, to begin with. But there's this problem with, you know, sense of urgency. And obviously there's many other, you know, I'm very sympathetic to the challenges our state and federal leaders have, because between healthcare and pension obligations, it's just crowding out everything else. It's super hard to make strategic investments. So I don't take any of that as a criticism of them, but we've got to figure out a way to be able to make some of these longer term investments that are not just tied to an individual transaction. And by the way, that is what the Danville region has done, right? I mean, this is a region that is better positioned for growth than any other region its size in the Commonwealth of Virginia, in my opinion. And it's largely because of all of these long-term, forward-looking investments that the community has made. It's really, to me, an inspiration.
Agreed.
Anita, the concept of job quality is actually one of the things that most interests me these days. Housing availability is right there with it, but and so I think I told you we started doing housing analysis as part of every strategy plan we do, but we've been doing some work around job quality, and I got motivated in this when Brookings did their study on opportunity jobs, and then MIT did their work on living wage calculators by cost of living. And we started looking at places around the country. And the good news is a lot of the lowest paying jobs have disappeared. I mean, the very lowest paying, they've been going down. Not as many people make $9 an hour or whatever. And so if you're by yourself as a single person, most of the jobs in most of the places in America pay a living wage. And a living wage, for those of you who don't, is defined by just barely making it. There's no savings, that's one set of clothes, that's no entertainment, that's no eating out. In fact, it's eating on $12 a day. I mean, you know, it is bare bones, but you can do that. But if you have one child and you are, you know, one wage earner, then the number jumps to, on average, $23 an hour to make it, because childcare and healthcare cost so much. And all of a sudden, there's not a county, I don't think in the Commonwealth and not in North Carolina, where even half the jobs get you to that living wage. And in fact, a lot of counties, it's 10% of the jobs. And that gap of what's there with what we have as a fairly meager safety net below that on healthcare, childcare, and the cost of just living, it makes it really hard. And so the quality job issue, I predicted, is going to be the economic development discussion of the next decade. Is, you know, not just trying to raise the number of jobs a little bit, but actually leap up into those quality job numbers. I think it's a fascinating topic for economic developers, especially, who are used to saying $1 billion of incentive and 463 jobs, you know, at an average wage of maybe. And even, unfortunately, those average wages are so skewed now because of the top and the bottoms. I think all of those are really fascinating discussions. And I agree with you, Stephen. Danville's done a better job than almost any place I could think of its size thinking about these hard issues and investing in early childhood and doing those kind of things. Lori, I want to turn, I know you've got some questions, so I'm going to let Stephen and Anita say anything that they might say about this, and then I'm going to turn it back to you. So be ready with your questions. Stephen?
I was just going to briefly say, I do think when you think about job quality, it really gets at an enormous tension, I think, when you combine economic development in rural areas and smaller metro areas and job quality, because the first problem is there's just not enough, there's not positive job growth in general, right, in most regions. You're familiar, maybe both you're familiar with the Conway Projects database. It kind of tracks every economic development project in the country, basically. We analyzed the last few years of data. If you take out the expansions of existing companies, so we just look at like new projects, 4 out of 5 counties in America do not get a single economic development project each year. 4 out of 5, wow. Right? I mean, it's just remarkable. So part of the challenge is in a situation where there's literally, you know, in some cases, negative employment changes, while you obviously want as many really good jobs as you can get, there's also this tension of trying to make sure people have at least some level of employment. And so part of my thinking has been, look, when we get to the point that you know, we can choose among different projects, and I can choose the high wage one over the low wage one, obviously we'll do that. But when we're in a scenario where we're not able to attract or cultivate enough job growth to keep everybody employed, you know, we want, there's perhaps a somewhat lower standard to at least be able to sustain people's livelihoods while you're trying to move forward with quality as well. I'm just trying to highlight that tension that's there.
Agreed.
So, Lori, you want to jump in and,
Sure.
and field some of the questions that have been popped out, and the three of us will try to say something intelligent about them.
Please do. We have 4 questions that have come in. So the first is asking the 3 of you if you have seen any noteworthy trends amongst businesses to support employees dealing with the stress of teaching children and working full-time, caring for family members, pretty much everything that's happening right now. And how can you push forward, a community push forward economically and continue all this work while supporting our workforce?
Well, I don't know that I've seen trends per se, but I will predict to you that there's going to be a wide range of national, regional, and local stories in the next month as kids go back to largely public school environments in a virtual fashion. I'm talking younger kids that require supervision, and it's going to exacerbate these divides that we've already talked about. So where you've got folks who are lower wage earners that have to physically go to work, but their children require supervision, the younger children require supervision, and their schools are going back remotely. The child care strain on this country right now is just enormous. And it was bad before the pandemic. It's terrible now, and it's about to get worse. I think what's going to happen is that as it becomes more obvious and those tensions become more sort of brought to the surface, there'll be more pressure to try to address some kind of way to help people, you know, get through. I wish I had a more positive story there. I know some businesses are trying to help, but they're also under strain themselves. And so you've got this situation where in many businesses, it's the single most common reason for absenteeism right now is the lack of childcare for the children of their employees.
So I've seen a new trend around flexible hours, that companies are allowing people to work whatever hours they want, so that a two income family can flex for their kids. I was part of a group yesterday that in another state that was putting their local chambers federation legislative agenda together, and this was a topic. And one of the things they asked to be part of their legislative agenda was tax credits for child care due to the pandemic and for group home tutoring due to the pandemic. So they're trying to find at least a sunsetted version of how do you give people a tax credit for this. You know, tax credits are great. We're going to be strapped for taxes also. It's a different thing you're creating, but I think that people have recognized it as an issue. And that goes all the way back to that stress on the family. And don't just think of this in terms of you know, the two parents working with the three kids in the suburban house. There are a lot of single parents, as Stephen said, that this was already almost a crisis. And now, you know, it is group daycares and other things coming up. The other thing I have seen is a recognition of planners and planning departments that the idea of auxiliary use buildings or use at home of whether or not you're having a temporary daycare center in your house, you know, three parents choose to do that, or you're having a mini homeschool where kids come together, where planners are starting to look at things that would make that at least exempt for during the crisis. I don't know what will happen afterwards, but I have seen some of that starting to happen.
So interestingly, Ted, I'm in a recent conversation with human resource managers of fairly large companies. They now are in the business of trying to organize these pods for employees because without them, their employees aren't able to concentrate on work. So that's been an interesting trend. I don't think before this, any one of them would have thought that they would be in this kind of retail sized effort to make sure that their employees could find childcare.
I think that we're going to see this for a while too, and you know, all of the trends we've talked about sort of end up crashing into the individual sitting at home trying to figure out how to manage this, and so, you know, there'll be some innovative things, but you still have to take care of a 4-year-old. There's nothing. I don't think the robot that has been invented yet that takes care of the 4-year-old and teaches them. So we've got some issues.
All right.
But if you invented it, Lori, you would make a fortune. There's no doubt.
Well, I will get right on that. And I think probably my teachers in high school would be like, she can't do that. So if any of them are on this call. So, all right. Well, our next question is specifically Virginia related, I think. Virginia had wanted to be less dependent on federal contracts and support. That's been a big conversation over the past few years. But we've become more dependent in the last year. So how does this impact what is ahead?
What was the last part?
Well, how does it impact what's ahead?
Oh, yeah.
When we're more dependent than less?
Yeah, I just think we have to keep working on that issue. You know, one of the greatest challenges that Virginia has from an economic development perspective is that there's not a big urgency to be more competitive. And it's largely because of this enormous role that the federal government has played in creating, you know, an enormous amount of very good jobs, very stable jobs, enormous amount of state revenue, of course, largely centered in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads, not the rest of Virginia. But it's kind of made Virginia a little bit less hungry from an economic development perspective compared to many of our competitors in the South. And, you know, our big challenge is we've got to build up a greater sense of urgency to address the things that we haven't been willing to do in the past. We're in a great place in education. We're at a pretty good place in infrastructure. We've got a great location. I mean, there's so many good things about Virginia, but there are a few other southern states, Anita is in one of them, that are very, very close competitors of ours. And there are some things that we can do to get better and to accelerate this sort of transition to becoming a more private sector centric economy. And those are the kinds of things I hit on earlier in my comments. That's a good question.
All right, next question. We have talked about trying to focus on slingshot efforts here locally, which will propel our region ahead as we come out of the pandemic recession and into the recovery. Do you have suggestions as to things which might be slingshots for communities like ours?
Well, assuming by slingshot, I'm assuming Charlie means something like sort of going after a particular significant economic development opportunity.
Yes.
And I think that there is value there. I mean, we've had several significant at-bats, you know, for the Berry Hill site, which I think is a super attractive site. Give great credit to Charlie and others in the region that realized that it needed an access road that was not going to be available in a timely way unless it was started sort of pre-project. I think that is ultimately going to be a big employment center for the region. But even before that, when you look at some of the other automotive manufacturing and assembly related opportunities like Morgan Olson that's expanding now, there are other companies kind of in that ecosystem that are taking a look at the Danville region, at Southern Virginia. I do think that whole space is going to be an area for potential growth. We certainly, it's such an easy place to envision being located as a manufacturer, and all the companies that have been located there have just raved about it. So I see that as a big part of the story. I absolutely think that together the state and Danville and the Southern Virginia Regional Alliance can come together and go after a few of those big opportunities. I would also say, I think adding that tech sector piece as well, while it's not as sort of fully developed, it's not as obvious what those things are right now, but I do think that there's going to be a growing number of tech jobs that will be open to being located in smaller regions, or even for that matter, just companies more fully leveraging what's available from an artificial intelligence perspective and some of the other technologies that are out there. So my thought would be a full court press. You know, we'll do the slingshots for sure. We'll continue to focus on education. We'll continue to focus on those great, I forget the term Anita utilized, but building that quality of place. All of those things together, it's really that whole mixture of things that creates a really fertile ground for growth. And then when we do have an opportunity to get a slingshot, thing, we'll go after it hard, but we got to keep working on the other things as well.
Lori, I think the other thing that a lot of communities are trying during the pandemic is really paying a lot of attention to the supply chains of their existing companies to see if there's a opportunity for a new redundancy, a new place that they can be. So I think this is a time where, the economic developers in the world aren't out making very many trips right now. They should definitely stay in touch with all the site selectors, but they should also get and spend more time with their existing companies and try to drill down in those supply chains. And because a lot of people are going to be reshuffling those chairs, and you might as well make sure, if you've got the product, and Danville does, make sure everybody knows that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think in general, most states, I would dare say probably every state, but certainly all the states I'm familiar with in the South, including Virginia, could be doing a better job on business retention. We ought to be visiting with our top traded sector employers every year. And the reality is there's some of them we don't see for years. And it's just crazy. And every one of them, to your point, Ted, they've got their own supply chain, they've got partners. I mean, even if you just think of it selfishly, there's probably other economic opportunities that would be derived from having closer relationships with them. But we've tended to, in Virginia at least, we've tended to have an economic development regime that is so dominated by recruitment. I think recruitment's important, and we're going to have some great recruitment wins. But the base and the strongest driver, the biggest driver of our growth and all of our losses come from our existing companies. We need to do more to stay close to them, I think. Do you want us to hit on some of these other questions?
Yeah, go ahead if you want. Jump on in, Stephen.
Charlie, yes.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's I was just, I think building off of that, and I'd love to hear from all three of you on this one, is can you speak more about the marketing, especially for our region? You talk about Danville, but I think when we talk about Danville, we're talking about a bigger footprint than Danville, of course, because that's just the way it works here. But should we be focusing? I mean, how should we be thinking about marketing in our community and with all these packages like you're talking about?
I think it's very important. One of the things that blew me away, I mean, when I moved to Virginia to take over VDP about 3.5 years ago and had a chance to travel across the Commonwealth, I am stunned. I'm absolutely stunned by the physical beauty of Virginia, by the quality and diversity of companies that are here, by the higher education. I mean, it is just amazing what is in this state. And I think that a mistake that a lot of us in Virginia make is assuming that everybody knows that. And let me just give you an example. Last year, we were ranked, #1 best state for business, in America by CNBC. And by the way, #1 largely because they also ranked us #1 for education and workforce. It was a really great outcome. But that ranking is based purely on basically metrics, poverty rates, education scores, tax rates, all these different things. There's almost no corporate perceptions in that. So #1 in CNBC, #4 in Forbes. So we're in the top 5 on those that are kind of quantitative, objective-based rankings. But when you look at the surveys of business executives, the latest survey from Chief Executive Magazine that came out a month or two ago placed us 16th. And by the way, behind North Carolina, Georgia, Texas, substantially all of our top Southern competitors were in the top 5 to 7 states. And so what you have is largely a perception gap. That we're not viewed poorly by corporate America. We're just not quite viewed, we're kind of the top of the second tier is the reality. And largely that's because Virginia has not marketed itself. I mean, when you look at what Georgia and Florida and just to a large extent North Carolina, what some of these other states have done and done for decades, when I got here at VDP, the state marketing budget for economic development was zero. It was literally zero. And so there was just a big lost opportunity. So we did get some funding back. We're starting to do that. The magazine you've seen is a part of that. There's a lot of different things that we're doing in that space. But we really have to tell the story. It's not just enough to have the quality and the assets. We've got to make those assets known to corporate America. When you look at the corporate site selection consultants, we can actually cultivate each of them individually. We're right up there, you know, at the top, neck and neck, kind of with North Carolina, Georgia, and so forth now. But the broader set of corporate America isn't there yet. And the reason it matters is that very often site selection consultants will tell us that a company will come to them and say, I want you to help me pick the best location for this new project in these 5 states, right? And if Virginia is not on that initial consideration set, we don't get considered to begin with. So it's a really important issue. I don't want to overdo it because there's a lot of other things that also matter, but it's super important. I think one of the questions was about, should you market Danville versus Southern Virginia? I would say both. You really want to tell that regional story, and certainly Danville would be kind of the you know, the heart, the urban center, if you will, of the region. But I think you want to tell the story of the whole region, ideally. And obviously, we're going to try to strengthen what we're doing at the state level in that vein as well.
Stephen,
got my soapbox.
well, stay on your soapbox for a moment. I actually want to ask you a question.
Please.
How coordinated do the respective marketing efforts at the various levels need to be in order to not collide into each other?
Well, you know, one of the challenges in a place like Virginia, and I don't know North Carolina as well, but I suspect it's very similar in the sense that you have a tremendous diversity of regions, from, you know, relatively large metros to really small towns, you know, urban versus rural, coastal versus inland. And so it's very difficult to have kind of this single, you know, monolithic message. So part of what I think is important to get out there is it's a variety of sort of complementary messages. So I do think it's important to be coordinated, but in particular coordinated with anyone who's actually making a significant investment. The reality is that, at least in Virginia, there's such a small level of investment in marketing that the risk of us overlapping each other is kind of low. You know, Virginia, North Carolina might have more of a challenge with that. But when you look, for example, the only group I'm modestly familiar with in North Carolina at the sub-state level, I guess, is I think it's called the Charlotte Regional Partnership, something like that.
Yes.
I don't know the exact budget of that group, but I can just about guarantee you it's 2 or 3 times the size of the biggest regional economic development group in Virginia. We kind of do economic development with a very light touch in the Commonwealth, and from a marketing perspective, that's really hurt. So long story short, I do think the coordination is important, but I think it's most important when you have both the state and other sub-state groups that are making a significant investment in marketing. And what the state obviously has to try to do is to balance a sort of a clear message for the state as a whole that also recognizes the diversity of the regions and assets in the state.
I just jump in and say that I agree with all of that. When a state does marketing, one of the things it does is it touts the things that the state's best known for. Right. So in a state that is, you know, if you're doing Florida, you'd be talking about some of the back office stuff in Jacksonville, some of the tourist. There are a lot of places that don't have any of that. Or if you're in North Carolina, you think about the image, you think about biotech. There are a lot of places that don't have any of that. So you can't. It's got to be a both and. You can't just count on the state to market for you, because you'll end up with just whatever the best thing going on in the state. That's where people will come, and then they'll go to where they're known. So Danville and Pennsylvania County have a new strategic plan in economic development just recently done that looks at targets, and they don't have to spend $100 million telling their story, but they have to tell their story to the right places, and they have to tell a consistent story. And these days, I think the line that Andy Levine at DCI has is, the calf rarely brands itself, I think it's become famous in our circle. The branding of a place is the image that you have out in the world. And there are a lot of people who are pretty good at helping shape that image. And so you want people to think about Danville in a certain way. You need to help them a little bit along that way.
All right, thank you very much. I think we have 2 more questions and we'll wrap this up. We're getting close to time. So from Julie Brown at the Institute, not specifically COVID related, but thoughts on the increase in Virginia's minimum wage and small business retention growth. It moves us to better jobs, but what changes can we anticipate?
I'm not an expert on this, but kind of building off the comments I said earlier, I am sympathetic to the notion of, people being able to earn a living wage. My personal preference would be for this to be kind of a coordinated federal effort, because then you don't get into all these issues with, state competition and particularly border communities. Think about Bristol, for example, in Virginia. But in terms of the impacts, it's going to be a mix. I mean, obviously, it's going to be great for a lot of individuals. I do think it will cause a lot of small businesses to change, how they run their operation. If you shift to higher wages, sometimes maybe there's things you might automate that you wouldn't have automated. I do think in general, we've got to make a move toward higher wages. The question is sort of what's the best, most equitable way to get there. And I don't profess to know the right answer exactly, but I do think it'll be a bit of a mix, and we'll have to see kind of how that goes. I do think Virginia was smart to do a phase-in so that we can sort of see how things develop over time. And I think a lot of it is going to be things that we might not have fully anticipated, both positive and negative. So we'll have to see where it goes.
Okay. Well, our last question of the day, the Institute for Advanced Learning and Research, which I think you all are familiar with in some shape or form, is starting an initiative for work-based learning opportunities in middle and high schools under the idea that getting students excited about local industries will keep them here, thereby promoting economic development in the area for the long term. As they start this project, they wonder what advice or encouragement you would give to employers who are wondering whether internships, job shadowing, apprenticeships, etc., are worth their time and investment during this chaotic time.
Well, I would, first of all, I would say, I think it's a wonderful thing that they're doing. And I think I will be stunned if they don't feel like they get a good return on investment for that effort, both the people organizing it as well as the businesses. I think for the individual participating companies, it may depend a little bit on the scale of the company, but certainly I think it's an absolute no-brainer for the medium-sized and larger firms. And I think as long as the folks that are organizing the program can make it as easy as simple as possible to participate for the smaller employers, there's probably a good return for them as well. I just think we can't reinforce enough that it's not enough for someone to just, poke around on the internet to get a feel for what an occupation might look like, a career might look like in different industry sectors. I think the more that we can introduce young people, let them sort of touch and feel and see what something is really like, I think the greater the likelihood that something for some of them is going to turn on a fire that gets them excited about it, wanting to learn more, wanting to get whatever credential they need to work there and so forth. So I'm just enormously optimistic and encouraging of all you in this effort, because even if you don't get it right on the front end, I think you're going to learn so much, and there'll be so many benefits for the employers and the participating students as you implement this.
I assume that the phrase "at this time" implicates doing these work-based learning opportunities during COVID-19, which for some of them, then necessarily they need to be done virtually because everybody is working virtually. And I actually think that the calculus of whether you move forward is the same as the one that you would utilize if you were doing them physically. It's a cost-benefit analysis. And yes, the cost may feel a little more frenetic trying to organize these opportunities virtually, but to the point Stephen makes, I think the more that can be done to help employers so that they're not having to figure out every detail of how to do a virtual internship or apprenticeship, the better. I also think, though, that the benefits are not only the longer term benefits of students appreciating the opportunities in their hometowns, wanting to come back, the short-term benefit of how much employees love the opportunity to mentor students, at this point, I would say ought to be a selling point for going forward. Just when your employees are feeling kind of, flustered and stretched and disconnected, to give them an opportunity to really mold some young person's interest in what they do. That might be a retention strategy you hadn't thought about as a company. So it's lots of factors to weigh, but I would still be in the business of encouraging employers to move forward. And the few work-based learning programs that I looked at over the summer that had to be done virtually suggest to me that there's still a lot of upside to doing these.
And say that we do lots of statewide surveys of businesses on what their issues are with workforce and other things. The number one in every survey we've ever done is that people don't have the work skills that companies are looking for. That usually translates when you put it in a focus group into they don't have enough work experience. Well, I'm sorry, the only way they're going to get work experience is if they start out getting work experience. So businesses, it's self-fulfilling that if you don't let anybody in your building until, they don't get work experience. So we're a big fan. We actually are seeing people now starting even younger, getting waivers and having kids in the 5th grade start doing career exploration. There's some superintendents in Missouri that have a goal of having a kid have a real experience, either online, virtual, something with 100 occupations between 5th grade and 12th grade, so that they can see what the world's like, so that they don't, all of us probably have a story about the 20-year-old who doesn't know what they want to do and finally at 37 figures it out. You've got to have more exposure, and businesses, it's in their own best interest to let as many things as possible. I happen to think that on-the-job training and apprenticeships are going to become massively popular in the next 5 to 10 years. So I think all of that works. Lori, thank you for letting us talk for a while with you. I'm going to turn it back over to you for finishing up.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the 3 of you for joining us today. This has been really interesting. I have many, many notes over here that I expect we'll be having some great conversations about in this community. And I am, on behalf of Danville Regional Foundation, thank you again. And we look forward to seeing you here in Danville sometime in the near future in a safe and COVID-friendly environment, of course. And thank you again. And thank you to everyone who attended, and be looking for this video within the next week. Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Ted. Thanks, Anita.